Yes, I mean, boy, what do you make of this?
Look, it's a diplomatic debacle is the phrase that I've used to describe this situation. It's all rather unedifying. It's all come out into the public eye. I think it's regrettable for all sides, actually, how this has all transpired, and it would have been good if this had been avoided because it is all quite unseemly. As interesting it is as it is for commentators like me to see how all the sausages are being made right now. It is quite extraordinary. Some of the statements that have been coming out from Winston Peters' office, where he said, the spokesperson said that New Zealand and the Cook Islands didn't see eye to eye on a number of issues. The fact then that second statement that came out on Sunday saying the Cook Islands had failed to properly consult with New Zealand. You don't normally see these at all. These things are just are handled quite quietly behind the scenes, quite carefully, and you don't actually see the spat in full flight. But this time you have.
Yes, what kind of levers do you think our government could pull, say, if we don't like what we see from this agreement between China and the Cook Islands? I note yesterday during post-cabinet press conference, Prime Minister Christopher Luxon wouldn't be drawn on that conversation. He wanted to see the agreement first. But what are some levers do you think that could be pulled?
Well, it's clear there's a media campaign going, there's a public pressure campaign going on now because diplomacy has failed behind the scenes. So Winston Peters, Christopher Luxon, they're using what New Zealand's opposition leader Chris Hipkins has called megaphone diplomacy, and I think it's quite a good description in a way to try and put pressure on Mark Brown publicly after the behind the scenes negotiations seem to have failed. But I think if you step back a bit and look at this agreement from 2001, the Joint Centenary Declaration. I don't think it's as cut and dried as some on the New Zealand side, Winston Peters and his spokespeople are making out about consultation. I'd encourage listeners to go and have a look at this agreement. It's actually very simple. It's quite straightforward. It's quite easy to read. But if you look under clause 4, and I'm looking at it now, it's quite contradictory. It says that in the conduct of its foreign affairs, the Cook Islands interacts with the international community as a sovereign and independent state. And then later on in the same clause, it says that the signatories undertake to consult regularly on foreign affairs matters. So when we say sovereign and independent, that really does mean sovereign and independent. And in fact, the agreement later on under clause 5 says that the government of the Cook Islands possesses the capacity to enter into treaties and other international agreements in its own right with governments. So you could argue, if you're Mark Brown, that you've got every right to be doing what you're doing. And he has consulted, perhaps not at the level that New Zealand would like, but he has consulted. He was in Wellington in November. And at the Beehive, and he had meetings with Winston Peters and Christopher Luxon. It's clear they don't agree, but I think you could argue that he has actually consulted with New Zealand about all of these things. In the end, I think there's an element of payback here for what is going on for the passports row last year, and also the blocking of Cook Islands joining the United Nations as well. So I think there's a few things going on.
Yes, and look, I also just want to dwell for a moment. Just if I think back to post-cabinet yesterday, reported suggestions to the Prime Minister is that New Zealand has dropped the ball when it comes to diplomacy with the Pacific. I draw our attention just a few weeks ago, we were, just thinking about Kiribati, the situation there with Winston Peters. Now this is unfolding. It's been a tough start for our Foreign Affairs Minister, hasn't it?
It has, and I've been thinking about this. If you think about last year, Winston Peters made a big play for visiting all the countries he could in the Pacific Islands Forum, all the members, I should say, because not all are independent countries as such. And he virtually achieved that, with the exception of Kiribati. He went to New Caledonia in December. That was one of the final ones left. He couldn't go earlier in the year because of the unrest there. Then Kiribati was basically the one outstanding one, and then that trip all fell apart. And again, it all fell apart very publicly in the media. And you wonder whether Winston Peters is now playing a different game. He's playing hardball. This is why this stuff is coming out in the media. It's not being dealt with delicately behind the scenes. I wonder how productive this strategy is, because it does actually cast New Zealand in a way as a kind of colonial power demanding things when it comes to the Cook Islands, when it comes to Kiribati. Remember, Winston Peters has said that Kiribati's aid is now up for review as a result of this meeting falling apart with the president of Kiribati. I do find it, again, all very unedifying. And others have made the point that Australia's Deputy Prime Minister went to Kiribati and accepted a meeting with the Vice President before the meeting with Winston Peters fell apart. Remember, Winston Peters is a foreign minister. He's not the Prime Minister. He's not the head of government. And so when it comes to rankings, yes, you can get a meeting with the leader, and often that's the case in the Pacific because these states are quite small. But I think it wouldn't have been beneath Winston Peters to accept a meeting with a lower ranked uh, official, a vice president. I think that would have been okay. It wouldn't have been ideal, perhaps, but I think it would have been better to continue the conversations uh, behind the scenes and to see if New Zealand could find a way to get these states perhaps on side. And I think that's with the Cook Islands as well. Perhaps when the passport issue fell apart last year, when New Zealand just said, no, we're not doing this, perhaps it should have been, well, what else can we offer you? We can't do the passports because of our special constitutional status. We're not comfortable with that. But what else are you looking for? And if Mark Brown had said, well, we want to do deep sea mining, we want ferries. And he could have said that to New Zealand, and New Zealand could have obliged. Perhaps he did. Perhaps New Zealand also said no. Ultimately we weren't there in the room. We don't know what was offered or what was asked for. But I think you tend to catch more flies with honey than vinegar. And that's, I think, perhaps the better path for New Zealand to take in the Pacific, rather than coming out with a big stick. But that seems to be what Winston Peters' strategy is in 2025. It is the big stick.
That's certainly, yeah, that's a good way to characterize it. Hey, thank you so much for your time. Fascinating times indeed. That is our international relations expert, Jeffrey Miller. You have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.